And welcome back. We continue with When the Legends Die by Hal Borland. Now, when we left off, we were in chapter 21, chapter 23, get my numbers correct, where Thomas has been learning to be a rodeo rider. Red Dillon has been training him. Now, as far as Tom knows, he's training him to be a winner. It turns out he's training him to be a loser. He is setting this up so that they're going to go from rodeo to rodeo. And Tom is going to win going into finals because he is a naturally gifted rodeo rider. But then he's going to get in the finals. He's going to blow the final and lose. And then what happens is Red is going to say, hey, let's let the kid ride one more time. Maybe he had a bad run. And so what happens is he takes all these bets because the people are convinced now he's going to lose again. And he sets them up. And so it's a scam that he's running from rodeo to rodeo. Now, where we left off in chapter 23 is that he has won he did well his very first round. There was a little tiny rodeo. The second round he won. And Tom is all set to go into the finals. And Red says, you're going to lose. You're going to lose big. And we're back on page 96, right after Red and Tom had their argument. Tom had drawn the number 3 ride in the finals, and his horse was a big black. Red, still playing his drunken role, let Tom do the saddling, but before he mounted, Red said, you know what I told you. And there was both threat and warning in his eyes. And Tom said, I know, and settled himself in the saddle, adjusted the rein, jerked his hat tight, set the spurs. The announcer bellowed, coming out of chute number 3 was Tar Baby, Tom Black Bull. And the crowd began to roar. Tom signaled the gateman. The gate swung open, the black lunged out bucking. It ducked, side jumped, and Tom raked with his spurs. He could ride this horse. He knew he could. But after the first few bucks, he let the rein slip and the black ducked his head. It got 6 inches of slack, came up with another buck, and Tom lost his leverage. As he went back in the saddle, the next lunge drove the candle into his kidneys. Then the pommel jabbed his lower gut, and he was loose in the saddle. The pain seemed to cut him in two. Another side jump, he knew was all over. As the black bucked again, he instinctively kicked his foot over and went sprawling. He was thrown clean and hard. The crowd groaned, and Tom lay for a moment, gasping for breath, aching with pain and hurting inside, because he knew he could have ridden that horse to a standstill. He rolled over, hunched to his knees till the pain eased, and got his breath again, then went slowly to his feet. He unbuckled his chaps and limped back to the chutes, head bowed in shame as much as in physical pain. Red came to meet him. He put his arm around Tom's shoulders and said loudly, tough luck, kid. Goddamn tough luck. What happened? Tom looked at him, hating him, and didn't answer. Red's fingers pressed into his arm, warning him, and he went back to the chutes. Tom sat down in the shade of the chutes, head in his hands. He heard a chute gate swing open, heard the grout and the pound of hoofs and the cheers of the crowd, the slap of the chaps on saddle skirts, and the next rider made his bid for the purse. It didn't matter. And the horn blew, the crowd cheered, and a few minutes later the chute opened again. The last rider's horse was squealing, pounding the ground with that punishing, man-killing dance of desperation. The crowd cheered, gasped, and groaned, and Tom heard the thud of a rider striking the ground. He didn't even look up. Somebody else had been thrown. Somebody who had tried, who hadn't been thrown because he was ordered to. Then the bronc riding was all over. The judges tallied their scorecards. The announcer was bellowing the final results. Tom Blackbull, because of his spectacular rides the first 2 go-rounds, was placed 4th, just ahead of the last rider, who was also thrown. Red came and helped him to his feet. Well, I guess that's it, Tom, he said. Your luck just ran out. He began stuffing the bronc saddle in the gunny sack. The men who had bets with him came to collect, and Red paid them off one by one. Oh, you took me, he said, but I still say my boy's the best rider here. He just had bad luck with that big black. A stocky, black-haired ranchman laughed. 2 others who had just collected bets from Red joined in the laughter. So you still think that boy's the top man? The black-haired man asked, winking at the others. Damn right he is, Red looked around. I say Tom could ride any horse here, any one of them. Well, that's big talk, Dillon. Well, I still say it is. Maybe we could set up a special ride for him, the black-haired man suggested. If you care to make it worth your while, what are the odds you're going to give him? Odds? Red laughed derisively. The boy just got thrown. You want me to give odds? I think we'll go home. Then Red turned to Tom. Think you could ride that black if you had another chance, Tom? Wait a minute, the black-haired man said. You wanted to back him on any horse here? That black's had a go-round. He's tired. Well, Tom's tired too. He's ridden 2 go-rounds today. The announcer came over to see what was happening. He turned and bellowed to the crowd. Don't hurry off, folks. We seem to have a special event in the making. Stick around. Red turned to Tom. You want to make another ride, Tom? Tom knew the answer he had to make. Anyway, he wanted to ride again to prove himself. Yes, he said. Red turned to the men around him. You heard him. He'll ride. So let's make it worth your while. Give me a chance to get back a little of my hard-earned money. I'll tell you what we'll do. Give me 2-1 odds the boy will take that ride of any horse you pick. Not just the 10-second horn, but all the way. He'll ride it to a standstill. Maybe he won't rake him with the spurs after the horn, but I say he'll ride him clean. Now, what do you say? Well, that, the black-haired man said, I want to see. A stakeholder was named, and Red covered the first few bets, then said, You boys just about cleaned me out, but I still got $100 saddle and a couple of good cutting horses. Well, I could use another saddle, the black-haired man said, and handed the stakeholder money enough to cover the bet. 2 other men covered the horses. Red turned to Tom. Well, Tom, you either ride now or walk home. He took the bronc saddle from the gunny sack and handed Tom his chaps. The black-haired man and several of the bettors went to the corral and picked out the horse. The announcer bellowed to the crowd, Well, folks, we've got it. Tom Blackbull, the boy who made 2 sensational rides before he was thrown in the finals, is going to ride again, a special event. He's going to ride that big bay that's bringing him to chutes right now. And listen to this, folks. Tom's going to try to ride this horse to a standstill. No time limits. This ride will be a showdown to the finish. There was a roar of approval from the crowd. Red and Tom checked the saddle, cinches, let-it-goes, stirrups, while the bay was still put in the chute. They checked the halter and the rein. Then they saddled the bay. It hadn't been ridden that day, but Red had watched it in the action. The first go-round was through a rider in 6 seconds. He tries to buck right, he told Tom, in a tight circle. He'll duck from the first jump. Don't, for God's sakes, let him get any slack. Remember that big black at home? This one bucks just like him. Same pattern. Tom put on his chaps, tightened his spurs, dried his hands. He straddled the chute, let himself down into the saddle. He adjusted the rein carefully, jammed his head tight, and set the spurs. You all set? Red asked. Tom nodded, and the gate swung open. The bay took 2 steps and went in the air as the crowd yelled. Tom raked with his spurs as the horse came down, trying to jerk its head. Tom was braced for it. He rode with 2 twisting jumps, 2 stiff-legged, spine-jarring bucks. The horse was big and full of fight. It kept trying to get its head around to the right, but unable to, it made zigzag lunges, right, left, and right again. It kicked and reared and spun. Tom rode with its rhythm, but at every pounding jump it felt as though his head was being driven right between his shoulders. His left arm seemed to be torn from his socket, but he rode, and he rode clean. The 10-second horn blew, and the crowd was in an uproar, but Tom heard neither the horn nor the crowd. He wasn't riding for time before the crowd. He was riding for himself. And he wasn't riding the bay. He was riding a hurt and a hate deep inside. The blood drummed in his ears, and his teeth ached with the pounding, but he held his rhythm. Then he began to gouge and punish with his spurs. Dull as the rowels were, they drew blood. He shifted his weight, brought it down with every jump, punishing the horse. He jerked viciously at the rein, giving an inch of slack and snapping it back, so trying to break the horse's neck. The bay was grunting with every leap. It seemed to ease off for a moment, then bucked in another pattern, full of fury. It bellowed. It came up in a pawing, dancing leap. Tom jerked off his hat and slapped it over the ears. It came down with a jolt that jarred the earth. Its snorts became gasps of pain, and it slacked again. Tom gave it more rein than he got its head around to the right and bucked in the tight circle Red had warned about. But Tom was still in the saddle, still gouging with his spurs. Then the rhythm slowed. The bay stumbled once, caught itself, bucked again. Now it began to come down spraddle-legged, bracing itself, and it staggered. It gave all the rein it wanted, but it merely drooped its head. It began to cough, took a few steps, and stood trembling. It tried to buck once again, and failed. The crowd was clamoring. A pickup band was alongside, shouting to Tom, "Get clear, he's going down!" And Tom felt the horse sagging under him. He saw the bloody foam for the first time, gobs of it welling from the horse's mouth. He grabbed the pickup man's shoulder, kicked free of the stirrups just as the horse fell from under him. Tom's feet struck the ground. He ran a few steps, then his knees buckled, and he went down and looked around and saw the fallen horse thrash, its legs jerking convulsively. It lifted its head, and there was a gush of blood from its mouth. Then his head fell back with a thud. So what Tom did is he literally rode the horse to death. Tom turned away, half sick, and heard the crowd gasp. He got to his feet and walked to the chutes, and looking back, his head was light. He was sweating. He reached the chute, clinging to the planks, and began to retch. Men crowded around. Red was there, pushing at him, ordering, "Leave him alone! Give him air!" The crowd eased back a little, and Red asked, "All right?" Tom, so weak he could barely stand, nodded and clung to the chute. A man brought the bronc saddle, tossed it to the ground, and someone asked, "How's the bay?" "Dead." The man stared at Tom in awe. "Dead as a doornail. Ruptured his lungs or something." Tom began to recover. He stuffed the saddle into the gunny sack, and Red had found the stakeholder, was stuffing handfuls of money in his pockets. He came back to Tom. "Come on," he ordered, "let's get out of here." He pushed his way through the crowd around the chutes and started towards the corrals and their own saddle horses. The crowds of men at the chutes followed them as far as the place where the dead horse lay. Tom glanced at it and turned away. Most of the crowd stayed to look, but the black-haired ranchman followed and caught up with them near the corrals. "Just a minute, Dillon," he said, and Red stopped and faced him. "This was a setup, Dillon." The man was flushed with anger. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. You picked the horse, and the boy rode him, didn't he?" "Yes, he rode him, and we paid off, but he could have ridden that black in the final go-round, too, only he had orders not to, didn't you, son?" "Leave him alone," Red snapped. "He made his ride. Go get your horses, Tom." The man turned to Tom. "You had your orders to throw that final go-round, didn't you?" Red stepped between them and cocked his fist. "I said leave him alone." The man stepped back. "All right, Dillon, you took us, but don't you ever try it again. Don't you ever show up at another rodeo in Aztec, you understand?" "Aztec?" Red laughed derisively. "Why, you two-bit tin horn. We're going where there's real money." He backed away. "Come on, Tom." And they went back to the corral, saddled their horses, and headed for home. Now on to chapter 24. It was 14 miles to Blanco, the trading post and post office halfway home. They rode at a lope the first 5 miles, and Red kept watching the road behind them. Then, since nobody was following them, he slowed to a trot. They began gloating over the way he had outsmarted the Aztec betting crowd. Red boasted, and he laughed, and he boasted again. Tom paid little attention. He was still living that afternoon. He could have ridden the black in the finals, and he knows that. He could have ridden it clear and clean and been champion, taken top purse money, but Red ordered it, and ordered him to lose, and made him make that one mistake, make it deliberately and get thrown. Then he rode the bay, which was a meaner horse than the black, a worse bucker. He rode it to the finish, rode it to death. He still saw the bloody foam and heard the cough and the final spurt of blood, the thud of its head on the ground, and he felt queasy. He looked at Red, heard his braggart voice, his jeering laugh, and remembered the way he had gouged him with his spurs, punishing not the horse, but something else, something that Red Dillon represented. He had punished it, gouged, and fought, and mastered it, rode the horse to death, and Red Dillon's voice and grating laughter were still right here beside him. So he's talking about when he's riding a horse, that's the only time in his life that Thomas is in control. Every other time, someone else is calling the shots, doing things against his will, forcing him to do things against his will. But when he's on that horse, Tom's in charge. Tom's in control. And for that time, even when he rode the horse to death, he was riding not just the horse, he was riding everything that he hated in life. Continue. He began to feel queasy again and wished Red would shut up. He was lightheaded and sweating. Red sensed something was wrong, and he looked at Tom and asked, "What's the matter with you?" Tom shook his head, said nothing, and knew he was going to be sick. He stopped his horse, got off, and fell to his knees and began to retch. Red grinned. "You're kind of shook up, I guess. You feel better now?" Tom got to his feet and stood, holding to the saddle till his head began to clear. Finally, he mounted again. They rode on, and Red said, "I'll stop at Blanco and get a bottle of tonic. That'll settle your guts." He laughed. Blanco was only a couple miles ahead. They rode up to the store, and Tom waited while Red went in. He came back with 3 bottles, undid his bedroll, and stowed 2 of them inside. They opened the 3rd bottle and took a long drink from it. He wiped the neck on his sleeve and handed it to Tom. "Take a good swing. Clean the dust out of your throat." Tom took a mouthful, swallowed twice, and felt the burn of the liquor, all the way to his stomach before he even tasted it. He took another mouthful, handed the bottle back to Red, and shivered as he swallowed again. It burned all the way down, then seemed to fume back and fill his head. Red took another long drink, corked the bottle, got on his horse, and they started on home. Tom's head began to reel. He swayed in the middle, had to hold on to the pommel. Red laughed at him. Hold tight, Tom. Don't start flapping your wings, you'll fly right out of the saddle. You ain't used to wings, I guess, are you? You feel better now? No. Red uncorked the bottle and took another drink. You will. He offered the bottle to Tom again. Tom shook his head and wondered why it didn't seem to be fastened to his neck. His body was down there somewhere. It didn't ache anymore, but his head was floating all by itself. Then he felt his body swaying and ordered his hands to grab the saddle and hold on. They got the order and obeyed. Then he ordered his eyes to look at his horse's ears and stop his head from spinning. His eyes looked, but the horse had 4 ears. Why? It didn't matter. He closed his eyes and let his head spin, and his hands gripped the saddle. Darkness came, and the horses plodded homeward. Tom slept, his hands still gripping the saddle, his chin on his chest. Red talked to himself, laughed from time to time, and began to sing. Tom woke up, almost fell out of the saddle, recovered and felt the queasiness again. Red's toneless singing rasped at his ears. Shut up, Tom shouted, and his own voice echoed in his ears. Shut your big damn mouth. Red laughed and went on singing, and Tom was asleep again. It was almost midnight when the horses picked their way along the trail along the bluffs and crossed to the barn. Tom awakened and wondered where he was, and the horses stopped, and Red bellowed, Mayo! Mayo, come here, you damn old chili eater! A light appeared in the house. The door opened, and Mayo appeared, lantern in hand. He came to the barn, and Red said, Mayo, you old chili eater, I took him. His words were slurred and thick, and he laughed. Put the horses away. We got to celebrate. He waved the bottle, now empty, and dismounted. Mayo steadied him, or he would have fallen. Red tilted up the bottle and said, All gone. Dead soldier, and tossed it aside. He tried to untie the bedroll, but Mayo undid it for him, got it over his shoulder, and Red started to the cabin, weaving as he went. Tom dismounted carefully, each motion deliberate. His head still swam, and he wasn't sure of his feet. He held to the saddle until he his equilibrium, then took off his bedroll, put it on the ground, and loosened the latigos. He almost fell as he pulled the saddle off, but carried it into the barn and got under the pole where it belonged. I'll finish, Mayo said. Go get some coffee. Tom almost fell as he leaned over to pick up his bedroll, but he got it into his arms and carried it into the cabin. Red was sprawled in his bunk, already asleep. Tom put the bedroll at the foot of his own bunk, went to the hearth, and poured a cupful of hot black coffee. He sat down at the table, the cup in both hands, and tried to drink. He burned his lips but couldn't feel the scald inside his mouth. His whole gullet was numb. He set the cup down and was sitting there staring at it when Mayo came in. Mayo glanced at Red, then came to the table. He filled a bowl with beans and chili and set it in front of Tom and put half a dozen cold tortillas beside it. Eat, he ordered. Put something in the belly. Tom had no hunger, but he rolled the tortilla and scooped at the beans and took a mouthful. It felt good, though he could hardly taste it. He scooped another mouthful from the bowl. You won? Mayo asked. Tom shook his head. I lost. Then you rode again. Yes. Tom wondered how Mayo knew. I rode again, and I rode a horse to death. Ah, Mayo nodded. He glanced towards Red, snoring in his bunk, pointing with his chin. He won. Tom nodded. Mayo went over to Red and went through his pockets. He took all the money he could find, counted it, and put it back a few bills. He folded the rest of it carefully and thrust it in his own pocket. Then he came back to the fireplace and filled Tom's chili bowl again. Tom's head was beginning to clear. He could taste the bite of the coffee, the flavor of the chili. Mayo sat down opposite him with a cup of coffee. Tell me about it, he urged. Tom told him, and Mayo listened, nodding, sipping coffee, making no comment. And at last he jerked his chin towards Red and said, Someday they will kill that one, or he'll kill himself. It was an unemotional statement, his only comment. He finished his coffee. Tomorrow, he said, we will harvest the frijoles, you and I. Go to bed now. Now remember, Mayo used to be a rodeo star for Red. He basically was Tom before Tom. But Mayo was in an accident where it broke his back. That's why he has the hunchback now. And Red, feeling sorry for him, has let him stay on basically as a housekeeper. But, Mayo's looking at Tom and going, I see where this is going. Okay, one more chapter, chapter 25. They harvested the beans in the old way, pulling the vines, piling them on a tarp, flailing them with a stick. They took away the broken vines and winnowed the beans, scooping them into a flat basket, holding the basket high and slowly pouring the beans onto a fresh tarp. The wind blew away the broken pods and chaff. It was slow work, and Mayo never hurried. The frijole, he said, takes its own time. It waits for the sun and the rain, then grows one day at a time. Why should I tell it to hurry now? If I do not eat this frijole, it'll wait and grow again. It does not need me to tell it what to do. He scooped another basketful and poured the beans slowly, watching the broken pods drift away and the dry, hard beans flow in a pattering stream along the tarp. We know these things, you and I. Our people were not born last year. We are the old people. They threshed the beans and winnowed them. Then they sat on the ground and sorted them, handful by handful, picking out the bits of stem, the small brown pebbles, before they put the beans in storage bags. The sun was warm, the air was mild, even the magpies in the cottonwoods had ceased their noisy scolding. Life seemed as unhurried as the day, or as the beans. Tom asked, "Where did you come from, Mayo?" "Oh, one must live somewhere." For a minute, Mayo was silent as he sorted another handful of beans. Then he said, "Why did you come?" Tom answered in Mayo's own words, "Well, one must live somewhere." "Well, where did you live before?" "On the reservation. I herded sheep. Before that, I lived in the mountains, in the old way." "Well, why did you leave the mountains?" "They came and took me away." "Your father and mother?" "They're dead." They sorted beans in silence for a time, and then Mayo said, "The mountains are still there." "The old way is finished." Unconsciously, Tom made the cutoff sign. "I have no one," he added. Mayo poured a handful of beans into the bag, picked up another handful, and began to sort them. "So you came here with him." He pointed with his chin towards the cabin. "Why?" "To be a writer." Mayo grunted. "Why?" he asked again. Tom wondered how to tell him what he felt when he was writing the Big Bait Aztec, but the words wouldn't come. It was something deeper than words. At last he said, knowing it was not the whole truth but still part of it, to be the boss. Mayo slowly shook his head, then glanced towards the cabin again. He's the boss. "Well, I'm the boss on the horse." "Sometimes. When he tells you to be." Tom shrugged. "Well, that's the way it is. I ride, I eat. What else is there?" Mayo pulled another handful of beans into the bag. It was almost full. He got to his knees, grunting at the stiffness in his joints, and tied the bag with a string. He got to his feet, motioned to Tom, who took one end of the bag. They carried it to the cabin and stowed it in a corner of the fireplace. Red lay in his bunk, 2 empty bottles on the floor beside him. He heard them, half opened his eyes, and muttered, "Get out and leave me alone." They went back to sorting beans. After a few minutes, Mayo picked up a single bean and held it in his gnarled fingers. "Frijole," he said to it. "Our young friend thinks he is the boss. He will eat you, Frijole, but you have a rumble to make, so you will make that rumble in his belly." He shook his head. "Our young friend will be eaten too. We're all eaten. If he has a rumble to make, where will he make it? In the belly of the one who eats him." He dropped the beans into the bag and picked up another handful and began to sort them. Tom shrugged and picked up a bean and held it between his fingers as Mayo had done. "Frijole," he said. "Maybe Mayo will eat you, not me. Then where will you make your rumble? Is Mayo the boss to tell you what to do?" Mayo went back to sorting beans. Finally he said, "Life is the boss. We do what we can, then we are old. We creep off in a corner, we sit, and the tongue makes the rumble, but it's only noise. Talk, talk, talk," and he sighed and was silent. They harvested the beans, and then they picked the chilies and made long strings of them and hung them from the roof beams to finish drying. But after that one afternoon of talk, Mayo was taciturn himself once again, saying little, keeping his thoughts to himself. Again, he's seeing probably himself and Tom, and it's kind of warning Tom, this is what's going to happen to you. The fourth afternoon, Red came out of the cabin, pale, weak-kneed and weaving. He made his way to the horse trough, doused his head in the icy water, then sat in the sun for an hour. At long last he shouted, "Hey, Mayo, make me some fresh coffee." So he's basically been in an alcohol coma for 3 days. So after that ride and coming back from the rodeo, he drank so much booze, he's been in a coma for 3 days. When Mayo told him the coffee was ready, Red went back to the cabin. He was there at the table, silent and disheveled, holding his cup of strong black coffee in both hands, when Tom and Mayo went in to eat supper. Red made a nauseated face at the sight of their food. He left the table, threw the empty bottles out the door, and went back to bed. He still had a hangover, but he was sober the next morning. After breakfast, he told Mayo to bring the horses in, and when Mayo had left, he said to Tom, "You're going to ride and get the kinks out of you. Next week, what day is it anyway?" "Friday," Tom told him. "Week after next, we're going to hit the road. Before we go, you're going to have to learn how to lose a go-around without getting thrown. Let a horse throw you, you might break your arm or something. Then we're out of business for a month." Tom was staring at him, his mouth set angrily. "What's the matter with you?" Red flared. "You got ideas? If you have, get rid of them. We're not in the hero business. You're going to lose a lot of go-rounds, you understand?" Tom didn't answer. "I said, do you understand?" Tom nodded reluctantly. "Heroes," Red said, "are a dime a dozen. Little two-bit heroes everywhere you go, and they all wind up broke, especially if you're Indian or Mexas. Mayo was a hero once." He laughed. "Now look at him. Just another broken-down old chili eater." Tom made no comment. After a moment, Red said, "There's a dozen ways to lose a go-round. You're going to learn them all, and you're going to learn how to look good doing it. And you're going to do your damnedest not to lose. You understand?" Tom nodded. "Now we're going to go down south," Red said. "They hold a lot of little rodeos down there, and they're awful proud of their heroes." He grinned. "Proud enough to back them with betting money. It'd be a shame to let that money burn holes in their pockets, wouldn't it? When we could take it away from them so easy." They looked in Tom's eyes, and he said, "If you get the idea about double-crossing me, get rid of him. Just remember who's the boss around here." "I'll remember," Tom said. "You forget it, I'll break your goddamn neck. Better put some new latigos on the saddle. I'll be out as soon as I finish eating." And that leads us through Chapter 25. We'll be picking up with Chapter 26 next time as we continue with When the Legends Die.